When I moved to Willowbrook Estates, I thought I'd found the perfect suburban sanctuary. The manicured lawns, the tree-lined streets, the sense of community, it all seemed ideal. What I didn't anticipate was Karen Pemberton, the HOA president who ruled our little neighborhood kingdom with an iron fist wrapped in a perfectly pressed blazer. I should have seen the warning signs during my first HOA meeting. Karen stood at the front of the community center, her clipboard clutched like a weapon, rattling off violations with the enthusiasm of a prosecuting attorney. Mailbox numbers must be exactly 4 inches tall. Garden gnomes are strictly prohibited. Basketball hoops visible from the street will result in immediate fines. The other residents sat in uncomfortable silence, occasionally nodding like bobbleheads afraid to disagree. My first real encounter with Karen came in early October. I'd been cultivating prize-winning pumpkins in my backyard for months, preparing for the annual county fair. These weren't ordinary pumpkins. They were Atlantic giants, some weighing over 800 pounds, the product of careful breeding, specialized fertilizers, and months of meticulous care. I'd even hired a landscape contractor to reinforce the garden bed and install proper irrigation. The largest one, which I'd nicknamed Goliath, was easily the most magnificent specimen I'd ever grown. That Tuesday morning, I discovered Karen standing in my backyard, examining my pumpkins with the intensity of a health inspector. She held her ever-present clipboard and was taking photographs with her phone. "Good morning, Karen. Can I help you with something?" I called out, trying to keep my voice pleasant despite the obvious trespassing. She turned to face me with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "Oh, hello there. I was just conducting my monthly property inspection. I'm afraid we have a serious violation here." She gestured toward my beautiful pumpkins as if they were toxic waste. "These oversized vegetables are creating an unsightly condition that's detrimental to our neighborhood's aesthetic standards." I explained that the pumpkins were in my backyard, not visible from the street, and that I'd checked the HOA bylaws thoroughly before planting them. There was nothing in the covenants about backyard gardens or vegetable cultivation. Karen's smile grew tighter. "Well, I'll be reviewing this matter with the board. We can't have residents thinking they can just plant whatever they want without considering the community impact." Over the next few days, I received a formal violation notice demanding the immediate removal of my, quote, agricultural eyesores. The citation referenced a vague clause about maintaining property in accordance with community standards. I attended the next board meeting to contest the violation, armed with copies of the covenants and photographs, showing that the pumpkins were completely hidden from public view. Karen dismissed my arguments with theatrical sighs and eye rolls. The intent of our community standards is clear, even if every specific scenario isn't explicitly written out. We must maintain property values and aesthetic consistency. The other board members, clearly intimidated by Karen's forceful personality, voted to uphold the violation. I was given 2 weeks to remove the pumpkins or face escalating fines. I tried reasoning with Karen privately, explaining that these pumpkins represented months of work and significant expense. I even offered to install additional privacy screening if visibility was truly the concern. But Karen seemed to relish the conflict. "Rules are rules. If we make exceptions for you, everyone will want special treatment. The deadline stands." As the deadline approached, I made one final attempt at compromise. I suggested donating the pumpkins to the local elementary school for their fall festival, which would require just a few more days to coordinate pickup. Karen's response was swift and merciless. "The violation period has expired. You now owe $500 in fines, with an additional $250 added each day until compliance is achieved." That's when things took a dark turn. On the morning the fines were supposed to begin, I walked into my backyard to find a scene of complete devastation. Someone had taken a large knife to my pumpkins, carving crude, jagged faces into each one. Goliath, my 800-pound masterpiece, had been butchered with particular viciousness, his massive orange flesh scattered across the lawn in rotting chunks. I immediately called the police and filed a report for property destruction. The responding officer was sympathetic, but explained that without witnesses or security footage, there wasn't much they could do. However, when I mentioned the HOA dispute, He raised an eyebrow and asked if I wanted to pursue trespassing charges against anyone who might have accessed my backyard without permission. Later that day, Karen appeared at my front door with a smugly satisfied expression. "I see you've taken care of your little pumpkin problem. Though I must say, the carved jack-o'-lanterns are rather festive. Of course, under our Halloween decoration guidelines, they'll need to be removed by November 2nd, or you'll face additional violations." The calculated cruelty of her comment made everything click into place. Karen hadn't just orchestrated the violation notice. She'd personally destroyed my pumpkins, and was now taunting me about it. I maintained my composure and thanked her for the reminder about the decoration timeline. But inside, something had fundamentally shifted. You see, Karen had made a critical error in her assessment of who she was dealing with. While I maintained a modest lifestyle in Willowbrook Estates, my background was somewhat more complex than my suburban exterior suggested. I'd spent 15 years as a corporate attorney specializing in real estate law before transitioning to private consulting. My client list included several major property development firms, and I maintained close relationships with zoning officials, city planners, and commercial real estate investors throughout the region. More importantly, Karen's violation of my property had given me something invaluable: legitimate grounds for legal action, and a deep understanding of exactly how petty tyrants like her operated. She thrived on exploiting rule ambiguities and intimidating residents who didn't know their rights. But she'd just picked a fight with someone who not only understood the system, but had the resources and connections to use it against her. My research into Karen's HOA presidency revealed a pattern of selective enforcement and personal vendettas stretching back several years. She'd driven out families with children by citing noise violations, forced elderly residents to make expensive landscaping changes, and consistently voted herself salary increases while denying basic community improvements. Most telling was her habit of purchasing violation properties at below-market rates when owners couldn't afford to fight her demands. But Karen had one particular obsession that stood out above all others: her prize-winning rose garden. She'd invested tens of thousands of dollars creating an elaborate display along her property's front border, complete with rare hybrid varieties, professional landscaping, and an irrigation system that would make a golf course envious. She regularly won local garden club competitions, and frequently hosted tours for visiting horticulture societies. These roses weren't just her hobby. They were her identity, her claim to superiority over the neighbors she lorded over. More interesting was what I discovered about the legal structure of our community. Willowbrook Estates had been developed in 3 phases over 15 years, with slightly different covenant versions for each section. Karen lived in Phase 2, which had more restrictive agricultural limitations than the Phase 1 covenants that governed my property. She'd been so focused on harassing me that she'd apparently never bothered to verify which rules actually applied to which properties. But the most fascinating discovery came when I reviewed the original development plans filed with the county. The land directly adjacent to Karen's rose garden had been designated as a potential commercial zone, contingent on future development needs and proper application processes. The parcel had remained undeveloped due to access issues and environmental surveys, but the commercial zoning designation had never been officially removed. Through my professional network, I learned that the parcel was quietly available for purchase. The current owner, a small investment company, had been holding it for years without finding a suitable buyer. The irregular shape and access limitations had made it challenging for traditional commercial development, but those same characteristics made it perfect for my purposes. I spent the next several weeks developing my strategy. Working with a discreet commercial real estate attorney, I structured the purchase through a limited liability company to avoid any immediate connection to my name. The transaction was handled entirely through intermediaries, with all paperwork filed through proper channels, but designed to avoid public attention until the appropriate moment. The property purchase was just the beginning. Through careful research of county ordinances and state agricultural regulations, I identified a perfectly legal enterprise that would require minimal infrastructure, but maximum impact. I applied for permits to establish a small-scale organic farming operation, specifically focused on heritage breed livestock and sustainable agriculture practices. The beauty of the plan lay in its complete legitimacy. Every permit, every application, Every regulatory requirement was meticulously fulfilled. I hired agricultural consultants, environmental specialists, and even a veterinarian to ensure full compliance with all applicable laws. The county officials were actually enthusiastic about the project, seeing it as an innovative approach to sustainable land use in transitional zoning areas. Karen remained completely oblivious as I methodically assembled the pieces of my response. She continued her petty harassment campaign, sending me additional violation notices for trivial infractions like mailbox placement and lawn mowing patterns. Each notice only strengthened my resolve and provided additional documentation of her pattern of abuse. The first phase of my project launched on a crisp November morning. A small convoy of trucks arrived at the adjacent property, carrying materials for what appeared to be simple agricultural infrastructure: fencing, a modest barn structure, and basic utilities. Nothing that violated any ordinances or required special approvals beyond what I'd already obtained. Karen noticed the activity immediately and marched over to investigate. She questioned the construction workers, demanding to know who had authorized the work and what was being built. The workers, following my instructions, politely referred her to the county planning office and continued their tasks. By afternoon, Karen was at my door again, her clipboard practically trembling with indignation. "Do you know anything about this construction project next to my property? Someone is building some kind of farm facility without proper HOA approval." I expressed surprise and suggested she check with the county offices, since any commercial development would be outside HOA jurisdiction anyway. The second phase began 2 weeks later with the arrival of my livestock. I'd selected the animals carefully based on both legal requirements and maximum psychological impact. Heritage breed goats were perfect for the organic farming designation, and their tendency toward vocal expression would provide an authentic agricultural atmosphere. The miniature donkeys added an additional element of rustic charm, while the rooster and his flock of heritage chickens ensured that dawn would be properly announced each morning. Karen's horrified reaction exceeded even my optimistic expectations. She appeared at the fence line that first morning, staring in disbelief at the pastoral scene now bordering her prized rose garden. The goats, curious about their new neighbor, crowded against the fence and began their cheerful bleating. The rooster, feeling territorial about his new domain, crowed with particular enthusiasm just yards from Karen's bedroom window. "This is outrageous!" Karen shrieked across the fence. "You can't have farm animals in a residential neighborhood. This violates every possible ordinance." I calmly explained that the property was zoned for agricultural use, and that all permits had been properly obtained through county offices. I suggested she might want to verify the zoning designations before making accusations. Karen spent the next several days in a frantic research mission, calling every county office and attempting to find some violation or oversight that would allow her to shut down my operation. But my preparation had been thorough. Every permit was in order, every regulation satisfied, every legal requirement exceeded. Meanwhile, my farm was settling into its daily routine. The goats proved to be excellent landscapers, clearing brush and maintaining the property boundaries. The chickens established productive foraging patterns and began producing fresh eggs. The miniature donkeys served as excellent guardians, their vigilant braying alerting me to any unusual activity, including Karen's increasingly frequent reconnaissance missions along the fence line. The third phase involved expanding the operation to its full permitted capacity. Additional livestock arrived weekly, each addition carefully planned to maximize both agricultural productivity and neighborly impact. A small herd of heritage breed sheep provided wool production opportunities. Guinea fowl served as excellent pest control, while contributing their distinctive calls to the morning symphony. Even a pair of peacocks found their place in the sustainable ecosystem, their magnificent displays adding visual splendor to the agricultural landscape. Karen's rose garden, once her source of pride and superiority, now existed in constant siege from the sights, sounds, and smells of authentic farm life. The animals showed particular interest in her prized plants, gathering at the fence line to observe her morning garden routine. Their commentary, bleating, crowing, and braying, provided a continuous soundtrack to her formerly peaceful horticultural activities. But the true masterpiece was yet to come. The fourth and final phase required the most delicate timing and the most careful legal preparation. I had discovered that Karen's rose garden, despite its elaborate and expensive installation, had never received proper permits for its irrigation system and electrical components. The outdoor lighting, automated watering systems, and decorative fountain all constituted unpermitted modifications that violated several county ordinances. More significantly, Karen's irrigation system was drawing water from the same aquifer that supplied my agricultural operation. County water rights regulations gave agricultural users priority over decorative applications, particularly during drought conditions or high-demand periods. By formally registering my farm's water usage requirements, I could legally restrict Karen's access to the water supply that kept her precious roses alive. The beauty of this final stroke lay in its perfect poetic justice. Karen had destroyed my carefully cultivated pumpkins out of petty spite and power-hungry enforcement of questionable rules. Now her own carefully cultivated garden would face the same threat. But this time, the rules being enforced were legitimate, properly researched, and absolutely ironclad. I filed the water rights petition on a Friday afternoon, ensuring it would be processed through normal county channels without any opportunity for interference or advance warning. The documentation was comprehensive and undeniable. My agricultural operation required primary water access rights, and any secondary users would need to demonstrate that their usage didn't compromise legitimate farming activities. Monday morning brought a county water management official to Karen's door with a formal notice of water rights violation and immediate cessation order. Her irrigation system was shut down pending review of her permits and resolution of the competing usage claim. Karen stood in her driveway, violation notice trembling in her hands, as the reality of her situation began to sink in. But even that wasn't the end. On Tuesday, code enforcement arrived to investigate the unpermitted electrical and plumbing modifications. Wednesday brought an environmental inspector to assess potential runoff impact from her elaborate fertilization system. Thursday featured a visit from the tax assessor's office to re-evaluate her property based on the commercial-scale landscaping improvements she'd never properly disclosed. Karen appeared at my fence line Friday morning, her usual composed demeanor completely shattered. Her roses were already showing signs of distress without their automated irrigation. The goats gathered to watch her approach, their curious bleating providing an oddly cheerful soundtrack to her obvious distress. "You did this," she said, her voice barely controlled. "Somehow you orchestrated all of this." I looked up from feeding the chickens and smiled pleasantly. "I'm not sure what you mean, Karen. I'm just running a small organic farm in compliance with all applicable regulations. Though I did notice you seem to be having some permit issues with your garden installation." The full scope of her situation was only beginning to dawn on her. Without water access, her prize-winning roses would die within weeks. The permit violations carried substantial fines and would require expensive remediation. The tax reassessment would likely double her annual property taxes. And through it all, she would wake each morning to the cheerful sounds of farm life celebrating just beyond her bedroom window. Karen's face went through a fascinating series of expressions as the pieces clicked into place. Confusion gave way to recognition, recognition to horror, and horror to the devastating realization that she had been completely, brilliantly, and legally outmaneuvered by someone who understood the system far better than she ever had. Her precious roses, her source of pride and power, would become casualties of the same type of petty rule enforcement she had wielded against others for years. The woman who had carved up my prize-winning pumpkins in a fit of spiteful power stood frozen at the fence, finally understanding that her reign of H.O.A. terror had come to an end at the hands of someone who knew exactly how to turn her own weapons against her.